All right, well, hello and welcome. Thank you for coming to our session today where we're going to talk about Passkeys and the last year in Passkeys and all the great things that have occurred. So we're really excited to have you. So before I get started, I just want to take a really quick poll of the room. Who here knows what a passkey is or what they are? Okay, I do not have to do
because we were going to do like another hour and a half just overview of passkeys, so we're so happy we don't have to do it.
We were going to have Christian do a demo for you and speak really fast. Maybe later, he says. All right. So my name is Christiaan Owen. I am a director at Guidehouse. Guidehouse is a management consulting firm, and I focus on enterprise IAM solutions as well as zero trust. I'm super duper excited about this panel today, not just because I'm a massive fangirl of Passkeys, but also I'm an even massiver fangirl of all the people on stage with me today. So Megan, I'll let you start introducing yourself, and then we'll go for the fun times, the questions.
Oh, cool. Thank you, Christine. So I'm Megan Shamas. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing for the FIDO Alliance. So my role, I'm responsible for all of our external communications, educational programs, and market adoption programs for FIDO authentication and passkeys.
Tim?
Hi, Tim Cappalli. I'm a standards architect at Microsoft. I look after FIDO and passwordless, strong authentication, and I also work on some other things around browser APIs for wallets, let's say, coming, some of these new technologies.
Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm an engineering tech lead at Duo Security at Cisco, helping to build out their passwordless support and also participating in the web authentication working group and the FIDO TWG to help kind of evolve FIDO 2.
And Christian?
Thanks, Christine. I'm Christian. I'm at Google, and I work on next-generation authentication technologies. FIDO 2, WebAuthn, Passkey, definitely kind of top of mind for us. And there I represent us in three different, I guess, tiers. Number one, I'm the co-chair of the FIDO 2 Technical Working Group, the FIDO Alliance. I also work with our platform folks to bring passkeys to developers, so do a lot of work with our Android and Chrome divisions to get passkeys implemented there. And then lastly, the thing that I've spent most of my time with in the last year is getting passkeys deployed for Google accounts. And now it's time for the obligatory plug. Everyone has heard it, I'll say it again. g.co/passkey. Please set it up. You can do it right now on your phone. If you don't want to listen to us, just go and type it, set it up, give me some feedback. Thank you.
Stand up, turn around.
They can find me later. Yes.
Yeah, no, that was my birthday present from Christian because it came out the day after my birthday. I was really excited. All right, so a lot has happened, and Christian just announced one of the big things that's happened that we're going to talk about later. But there's still a little bit of stuff to talk about with passkeys and some concerns we have seen out there. So we want to get that out of the way first. And the first one is about copying the private key, which many of us know that is something that happens in passkeys. Christian, could you talk a little bit about why that decision was made and why you think that it is the right decision?
Yeah, happy to. So we've had FIDO 2 and WebAuthn for a number of years, and we've seen adoption, but we haven't seen off the charts adoption, right? When we thought about implementing passkeys inside of our own products, and we have dipped our toe in the water with certain flows. We published some data on the Google security blog, which if you're interested, Google that. You can take a look at some of the data that we have on how well FIDO and passkeys does in practice. Anyway, back to the question. We found essentially like one big sticking point when it came to FIDO adoption, and it's actually the same problem that biometric authentication on mobile phones had ever since, I think, the iPhone 5S was the first device that, came out with a fingerprint sensor on it. And then, everyone else really followed suit. Biometrics and using biometrics for authentication was really thought about as a convenience improvement and not as a security improvement. And the reason I say that is very finicky, right? Whenever an app detects anything strange, or sometimes just because they want to, they'll fall you back to password very, very easily, right? Open your favorite application on your phone, banking app, you set it up for Touch ID or Face ID or the equivalent on another platform. You open the app the next time, you touch your fingerprint, and one day it says, nah, I want password instead. Or if you move to another device, you're right back at password. That is not what we have in mind for the passwordless vision and for passkeys. We want users to stop using the password and move to something that is more secure. The only way in which we can achieve that is if some semblance of that identity actually gets transported from the old device to the new device, credential lifecycle management. So it was really imperative. It's kind of thinking back, like, they say hindsight is 20/20, right? But if you think back, there is no way to get where we want to go without some mechanism or some affordance whereby the material that makes you, that secret key, that material makes its way to a new device. Now, there's lots of debates around whether additional information should be sent along with that. And I think, over time, there might be certain use cases where that is applicable. But today, for most deployments, and at least for the implementation that we've done on Google accounts, having that credential live somewhere in the cloud, yes, of course, it's end-to-end encrypted and it's well protected, but having that credential move from one device to another is really what makes passkeys truly unique and much better than anything else we've had based on biometrics and any kind of scheme so far, because it is durable and it survives device loss.
If I could just add to that real quick, because I think there's maybe like a little bit of a confusion around passkeys in terms of the synced, being able to sync passkeys. This is a net new functionality for FIDO authentication. This isn't a replacement for our existing FIDO authentication, meaning like FIDO security keys that are device bound, those are not going away. This really just expands use cases, particularly for consumer use cases, so that we can scale. So if anything, it's just like more functionality to bring it to more folks. And not, totally like backpedaling on what our security posture has been for the past 10 years.
Yeah, and just a real world example, I can't say the actual number, unfortunately, but the number of users that are in Azure AD that don't even have any form of MFA is absolutely staggering, right? So if we can just replace the default posture of a tenant from password to passkey, even the syncable one, we're infinitely better than we were before. Like I honestly saw the number for the first time and my jaw dropped. It is horrifying.
Yeah, the percentage is really high. That's true.
Well, I'll add from the relying party's perspective, the loss of device binding that security modeling, a lot of pre-passkey security modeling factored in, is the loss of it isn't as devastating as it may seem at first glance. As a relying party, you really need to reevaluate what you were hoping to achieve from that. Are you trying to detect anomalous use of credentials that may have been shared? Well, there are much better tools out there that have a much more robust way of evaluating the posture of the access device to determine that. And so there are existing solutions if you think outside of the WebAuthn box, or else if you think only within the realm of WebAuthn, you're going to become very frustrated very quickly by how WebAuthn is an authentication API. It is not a device posture evaluation API, and it will never be. And so if, for a lot of consumer use cases, passkeys are great because you don't have to invest as much into your account recovery because the platforms will handle that for you. But if you are the kind of organization that is working in a high assurance environment where you have those standards that are enforced on you, there are tools out there and that are existing and getting better over time that will do a much better job than what WebAuthn will be able to give you. So don't lose heart. Just take a step back and look at maybe if you're using a third-party provider for passkey support, for example, look at some of their capabilities. And maybe they already have something that you just need to tap into that you didn't use before.
Yeah. So I'm going to do one more, a little bit of well, it's a downer and an upper, both at the same time because we can always twist it. But what are some of the hurdles that we've seen in the past year that maybe still need to be overcome? And I'm going to start with you, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Christiaan mentioned, right? So with device-bound credentials prior, there were affordances made to provide some information about keys, how they were stored, what type of authenticator they were, and that was really important. That is still really important for enterprise because it's not just about phishing in the enterprise. It's about ID proofing and binding an identity to that credential, right? So it was not necessarily a misuse of the credential, right? But you're taking advantage of the technology for enterprise-specific use cases. So we still have to work on that, right? I think the nice thing, though, is that if you still want device-bound passkeys from security keys, they're still there, they're thriving. If, in my opinion, they're more important than ever, right? Like, I think the security key vendors should be ecstatic about this. Because, for these high assurance use cases, that still remains one of the only option for many, many organizations, and that hasn't changed. I can say, at least from the Microsoft perspective, we believe security keys and with device-bound passkeys and syncable passkeys should be on equal footing. Maybe not for a consumer use case, but in the enterprise, we want to make sure we give the tools that if your organization only allows security keys, then we want to make sure maybe we can get rid of some of the other stuff that you see on the Windows platform, let's say. So I think some of those optimizations just have to come over time, right? We've kind of keying off something Matt said. I think what happened is when passkeys came out, so many more people entered the chat, right? Because there's a new implementation of FIDO. And I think it may have gotten a little bit overloaded on what FIDO was for, right? It's just for authentication. To Matt's point, right? We get onto all these, I want to do, document signing, and I want to do all, and no, it's just for authentication, right? So mapping out how those things in the enterprise can passkeys and device-bound passkeys can enable those use cases is super important, and ensuring that we have all the security layers that are needed. The thing we're really starting to look at now, especially in the FIDO Alliance, is there's a lot of tools, kind of, again, to Matt's point, there's a lot of tools that are out there that we're finding a lot of folks don't realize, right? Like, there's not, I hate the term BYOD personally. BYOD is a useless term. It's either a managed device or an unmanaged device. That's all that matters. Doesn't matter who owns it, right? Except in some countries. But the reality is, I firmly believe whether something exists right now or not, on a managed device, we can give you anything you want. We just have to go build it. It's easy on a managed device, right? So we have to find for enterprise specifically this balance of a completely unmanaged device. There's other tools, right? There's mobile application management. There's third-party passkey providers that are coming, right? We actually have a lot more tools in the toolbox than we ever did before. So I see all of this as net positive, even though we have to work through some of the challenges.
I'm smirking, because I always am smirking, but I'm smirking particularly right now, because I love the question, what are the hurdles that we're facing? Because it's literally, that's sort of just evidence to the quickness at which the members of the FIDO Alliance can just get things done, right? We're talking we announced, we're gonna sync passkeys are a thing, literally a year ago. Now, platforms are enabled, Google's rolled out, CVS is rolled out, PayPal's rolled out. These discussions that we're having are inevitable discussions that we need to have to move this forward, but I don't see them as hurdles at all. It's just this is our path forward, and we're just trying to optimize it, right? So.
Well, I think one of the hurdles, though, is that it's moving so quickly that sometimes we need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture as we start continuing to move forward, right? So to that point, we now get to go to the fun part, which is to talk about the relying parties that are starting to roll out passkeys, because without the relying parties, we have no adoption, right? So Matt, can you talk about, as a relying party, your journey of getting towards a passkey implementation?
Sure. So Duo Security had existing web authentication support prior to passkeys. So when the passkeys announcement came out, it wasn't like we were scrambling to try and figure out how web authentication fit into our authentication product. The kinds of conversations that we were having were more like, okay, as a relying party, we actually kind of are at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of influence over how passkeys can be used. And what I mean by that is the sense our only way of accessing these capabilities are via the WebAuthn API, which is owned by the browser. And it's the browser and the authenticator vendors that have the real they can steer the ship, so to speak. And it's not to say that relying parties don't have input into that process, because we do. There are those of us fighting the good fight from the relying parties' perspective, and everybody's trying to find this very user privacy-centric way of offering strong authentication, and it's trickier than it sounds. And so I think the most challenging thing as a relying party using web authentication for strong authentication is keeping up with the velocity of changes at both the browser and the platform vendor level. And you really just kind of have to hang on for the ride, because a new version of Chrome will come out, and they are, to their credit, they are rapidly iterating towards a nice web authentication experience. The browser modal experience is a lot better now than it was a year ago. And they keep trying to find that good balance. And so as a relying party, like, you have documentations that can, within a week's time, fall out of date because an additional screen is in there. Now you got to scramble and like, oh, where am I going to put this extra screenshot in? And you have users asking about, well, why can't I hide this modal? And we were like, well, it's out of our control. So I think it's just, as an organization, maintaining flexibility, because things will change out from under you, and you need to architect that into your architecture.
So I think you make a good point, though, that there's not only do we need to educate end users, which is something we're moving to that topic next, but also platform providers need to learn how to educate relying parties to be able, when they're doing updates, et cetera, to be able to make sure that you can also educate your end users.
Right, and that's why it's important. If you are an organization that is using WebAuthn, or your internal users are using it, or you're B2C and you're offering a service for others to use, you need to have many people on your development team using at least Chrome Beta, for example, because that will be sometimes the only indication you have that something is changing, and it will give you time to reflect.
One thing I think that's newish, right? The last kind of iteration of FIDO, one of the things that, I'm talking about this because I think we spent a lot of time on it. We didn't really have developer resources. We didn't have really good, universal, generic, not tied to a platform, not from a specific company, developer resources. And so if you're not familiar with passkeys.dev, we want that to be the place that you go for a unbiased view of how to deploy passkeys. It's where you can go to see when the browser support changes, when the OS support changes. Like, we literally, when Matt or I find out about a change, we update the site that day, right? So it's literally, we had to literally add a last modified date because we were changing it so quickly. So we really would like, that is a community site. If you as a relying party are deploying and you find something, like, there's contact information on there. If you want to do a pull request, it's on GitHub, right? Like, we really would love this to be a community effort, because at the end of the day, the experiences are getting better because of the community across the board, whether it's platforms, passkey providers, RPs, end users, and we even get end users that submit questions on GitHub. It's not really, I wouldn't recommend sending it to end users, it's not really the audience, but it's amazing the amount of feedback we've gotten, and I think that's really helped a lot of relying parties.
So back to end user, let's talk about education and educating them to get them to start adopting passkeys, because of course without the end users using them, there's no adoption. So Megan, what has the FIDO Alliance been doing to be able to help educate end users and help change their behaviors to move away from passwords?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I hope that folks attended Andrew's session, keynote yesterday, as well as the UX session yesterday. But we've sort of, as an organization, have shifted towards, of course, we still have development and things like that we need to work through with the tech, but really we see it as our responsibility to be giving relying parties guidance on how to best optimize their sign-in enrollment and sign-in experiences to optimize enrollment. So there's varying opinions on whether or not consumers care or not about the security. Some do, some don't. But really, what are the cues? What are the images? What is the language that we want to provide to consumers to get them to opt in? And I think the UX guidelines are a really great sort of starting point for relying parties to start on that journey. And I think we did find some really interesting findings from the research. I mean, we did a lot of live interviewing, and folks are really like not so. The tired of passwords thing, people actually, we gotta pry those things out of their cold dead hands. Like, they don't hate passwords, right? Because they're not using passwords in an optimal way for the most part, right? So it's really not that hard for them if they're using the same password across sites or whatever folks tend to do. So it's really gonna be something else that's gonna drive folks to opt in, and it's more on the simplicity and convenience side. And I think, so Christiaan's session yesterday, he went through some of those flows as well, of some of the ways that Google is looking at that. But I think it's gonna be, for us, it's really important for us to give the relying parties that stuff, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to be communicating with their end users. For us as an organization, we also see that it would be really helpful for us all as an industry to be providing like really consistent messaging out to consumers. So we're really going to start in earnest some of those kinds of programs in the fall of next year.
So does that mean when I chat with my waitresses in Vegas, I should be pushing passkeys because maybe I have been?
Well, I think our waitress yesterday claimed to know what passkeys were.
She did.
So.
She did. It was amazing. That was the coolest thing. She asked us. She said, "What do you guys do?" We explained to her at a very high level, and then we started digging in as we realized she kind of understood what we were saying. And finally, she goes, "Oh, I have those. I understand exactly what you're talking about." And it was really cool. And then the next question is, well, when can I use that for everything?
Yeah.
So I think there actually is a desire for consumers to start using passkeys. So we're waiting for some of the relying parties to catch up. But I think that I'm hoping that that's what we're going to get this next year.
I think Google, I'm not to speak for Christiaan, but I'm going to, is that to have like a relying party like Google be like a reference implementation and have folks starting to use that, using the icon, using those prompts, that's going to go a long way to, oh, this is what I did at Google, now I'm going to go do it here, here, and here. I mean, it really only takes 1 or 2 sign-ins to really get on board with it, so.
Maybe just to add to that,
Yes.
I think that was exactly the goal with our launch, right? Our goal with our launch was not to get 1 billion users overnight, right? I think my internal data that I gave my team is like, if I see 100,000 users adopt, or 100,000 users, like we don't get out of bed for 100,000 users, right? If we get 100,000 users to adopt, that would be success if the public message is, passkeys are ready, they're here, please take note. And it's not end users who need to take note, it is developers. It's the folks in this room here who need to take note. We would love everyone here to join us on that journey. I think Andrew did a great presentation. I think it was at the FIDO event last week. Every year we talk about 2018, the year of FIDO adoption, 2019, the year of FIDO adoption, right? This 2023, it is the year of FIDO adoption, right? I'd love for us to be here next year and not being able to recount. This year it's still fairly easy. Like on my 2 hands, I can talk about the larger services that have actually adopted passkeys over the last couple of months. I'm hoping that next year that being possible to do because everyone will just be there. I think the technology is ready, as folks here said, Matt said earlier, right? There are some edge cases, there are some rough edges, there are some handoffs between your service, the browser, the system, but those things are being ironed out, and I think they're at a point where they're good enough to actually start to push them out to users, which is what we've done. And I'm hoping that, over the next couple of months, we gain that confidence so that we can start to not ask users to go to g.co/passkey, which everyone should go to, but rather to opt everyone into the experience so that the next time you sign into Google, we're just going to tell you, you're not getting a passkey. That's going to be your primary experience. We're not quite there yet, but I think we're getting closer and closer.
So I want to jump in real quick.
So I'm going to put my developer hat on real quick. One of the things that I'm most excited about the FIDO Alliance's UX working group, or the UX guidelines that they released or announced here at Denverse anyway, is the fact that like the ecosystem is mature enough. It's something like 80% of across Android and iOS, 80% of mobile devices can now do passkeys. And that is this inflection point in my mind where everybody has access, almost everybody has access to something that can do FIDO. So like what is needed now to get a critical mass of passkey adoption? And so if you're an open source maintainer, or you're like, I do open source WebAuthn work with my library, Simple WebAuthn, there we go, yeah, dropped it. But now like imagine somebody getting into WordPress passkey support, not just an extension, but like first party passkey support into WordPress. Overnight, you would have, WordPress is still what, 30% of the internet? Like that represents an incredible amount of potential passkey users. Shopify is adding it. A lot of consumer-facing sites are starting to add it, and we need, in the next year or so, maybe I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead, but
no, it's okay.
One of the things I think developers should think about is like in a year's time, if you can easily add this, we can get everybody familiar with it, and so it's the developers that are really going to be able to implement that, and so.
Yeah. So my next question is actually to Christiaan. Because he looks so sad over there, he hasn't been talking enough. So I'm gonna read it exactly as written because I don't want to get in trouble. How are the platforms working with third-party providers to enable consumers to save passkeys to their platforms? And how are they integrating amongst themselves for passkeys to travel between platforms?
No, I'll start with we're working very well with all these other third parties. I think that was one of the goals which we had even before, way before our Google accounts launch, and even like back in November when we started pushing out passkey support on Android. Our goal from day one was to open this up and allow this pluggable architecture that not only can Google Password Manager play, a little awkward name there, Google Password Manager storing your passkeys, but hey, that's how it is right now. But the idea is that your passkeys are managed by your password manager or your passkey manager. Google Password Manager was the first one on Android to offer that functionality, but we have a brand new credential manager API that is shipping with Android 14. Coming out a little bit later this year. The alpha version is out there. I think we've already gotten 2 revisions. There's a beta coming very, very soon. We're getting ready to lock that down for the end of the year. Those APIs are available to anyone here. I know we're working very closely with our friends from 1Password, Dashlane, and others to make sure that those APIs are robust. Anyone who wants to be a passkey provider on Android can play. The APIs are there. We think it's critical to pitch that, and I think that message has sometimes gotten lost. I'll tie this back into the earlier conversation. We need adoption, right? Today we read on Hacker News and other places like, hey, this is another data grab by Google and other companies, just getting more users into the ecosystem, and we want to keep them there. That is not what passkeys are supposed to be. It's supposed to be an open mechanism. Anyone can contribute. Anyone can participate. You can pick where you want your passkeys to go. If you want your passkeys on Android to be in 1Password, fantastic. We want to make that a first-class experience for you. So those things, we'll start to see more of those get out the door. It is an Android 14 thing. It necessitates changes at the OS level, which means it'll be something going forward. But with Android 14, we aim to bring that to the world. The last part of the question around the transfer, that's a harder one. Passwords today, if you want to move from one password manager to another, dump your passwords to a file, right? It sits there, maybe they get stolen, maybe they don't. No one really cares because everyone knows passwords suck. No one in their right mind today trusts a password as the only factor to allow someone into a high-value account. We always augment it with other stuff, maybe some OTP, maybe some push-based thing, maybe an SMS. Passkeys are supposed to be different. We want the passkey to be the only thing you use to get into your account. We don't want you to have to fall back to SMS or push-based or an authenticator app. The goal is that your passkey is good enough. If we then say, well, passkey export is just going to be a file on a disk, that's going to open up issues, right? That'll be where attackers start to swoop in. You can see the social engineering attacks where there is some website telling you to go and do this export and upload this file. So it is a hard problem, much harder than with password managers. I will say there is active work right now between actually great work being done by the password managers on figuring out a cryptographic sound solution to this problem. I think we're very close to publishing some of that, like in the open ecosystem where folks can take a look at, but it's definitely one of the most top of mind issues for us because users do change their mind, right? Today I'm on Google Password Manager, tomorrow I want to be somewhere else or vice versa. How do we enable those experiences? Actively working on it, and I'm hoping to have a solution to that later this year.
Yeah, and just to add one thing, right, it was interesting when we launched this, right, there was a lot of the negative press around this is platform lock and all that, right? At the end of the day, if we want to kill passwords, when someone takes a device out of the box, they need to have a capability without purchasing something else. I want you to use third parties. I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying that, but I want you to use a Dashlane and 1Password. Like I want you to be able to have that awesome experience across all your devices, regardless of who makes them. But just like, all devices kind of have to have Wi-Fi out of the box, but you can use a third-party Wi-Fi adapter if you want to, or we have to be able to provide a baseline without telling users they have to go buy something else. So that's why the prioritization happened the way it was, how it did. Sorry.
So Tim, how should we be using passkeys in an enterprise setting?
Oh, that's loaded.
I know. I like to give you the hard one.
Yeah, I think the reality is right now, if your flow starts with a password, replacing that with a syncable passkey is still a better user experience, and you can still continue doing whatever step up you have, right? A lot of organizations are deploying the Duo app or Okta Verify or Microsoft Authenticator, right? Just if you can drop that in as the first step, the user is going to have a better experience. It's going to get them familiar with it. There's a lot of studies out there that say when users have better protections at work. They bring that into their personal life. They're more, so that's kind of part of the effort as well, is like, there's so many flows out there. That number I can't tell you in Azure AD. If we could just get all those people using a syncable passkey, the world would be a much better place.
Everybody's really, really wondering what the number is.
I know.
It's really large.
It's one of those things I saw, and I'm like, I'm not sure if I was supposed to see it. I don't know.
Really large.
Yeah, but it's very big, and there are studies of that much worse number. But I think we do want to work on making sure that default experience that you do get from either a third-party passkey provider or the platform itself can meet a large majority of enterprise use cases. And we do believe it meets a significant number of them today, but we do want to make sure that higher assurance use case, and also on the higher assurance consumer cases, which tend to overlap, we want to make sure that we can have a solution. There's a lot of kind of tools in the toolbox that we could do, but we want to make sure that that translates well into all environments, right? Because my favorite thing to say is, an enterprise user is just a consumer at work, right? And if you make their life miserable at work with these experiences, they're going to rebel against all of them. So finding that balance is what we're working on. Dean's doing awesome work in the enterprise group at FIDO.
I was going to give him a plug.
To try to map these out, right? Because not all of these things are obvious. The things I mentioned earlier, like, a lot of folks don't realize, like, data on certain devices is completely separated, and you could have a hardware-bound passkey there, but a consumer syncable passkey, and it's the same experience, right? Like, mapping out all those things aren't well documented at the meta level, I think is a huge piece of this. And obviously just getting large enterprise IDPs on board, right? We haven't rolled out passkey support yet in Azure AD. It's coming very soon. But that's going to be these large SaaS IDPs, when they adopt passkeys, that's going to be the rocket ship, right? I mean, it's even today, right? If you're using sign-in with Google, you support passkeys in many ways, right?
Yeah, so the word enterprise is sort of like, well, I mean, there's so many use cases within one enterprise. I mean, there's different enterprises that have different use cases, so it's not like, a cut and dry answer. To Tim's point, I mean, there's plenty of enterprises that are just using passwords where a passkey is going to be infinitely better than that. But you also have like use cases within like different organizations where it's like, hey, give your admin security keys, but like every employee doesn't need a security key. It's stuff like that where it's like, hey, like, again, like we're just trying to broaden the amount of use cases that we can cover, through our technology. So all good there, but I want to give a shout to the EDWG, which is our Enterprise Deployment Working Group, which is led by Dean Sachs from AWS, because we're going to be releasing a bunch of papers on these topics, which is, look at your use case. Okay, are you using passwords today? Here's your considerations. Are you moderate assurance? Here's your considerations. Are you high assurance? Here's your considerations. So I think that's going to be a really good foundational piece of how you can use what's available today while we're kind of working on like additional features maybe to be added in the next year or so.
I want to jump in real quick from the relying party's perspective. Enterprise is a spectrum of organizations. You may be an organization where every single device that accesses your network is a managed device that you have complete control over, and you want to know every single security key and you want to assign them per serial number to a user. Like that is probably one side of the spectrum where you can leverage maximum control over your devices. Maybe you're a B2C kind of organization where you allow BYOD, or sorry, Tim. You allow.
Those are fighting.
You support use of unmanaged access devices, and that isn't. But you are an enterprise offering that service to others. That is another middle part of the spectrum, and then you start getting into, I guess, what some might call consumer use cases, and you have this incredibly wide range of security modeling and threats that organizations are protecting for, and you have a single API that's trying to serve all of those use cases. And so like right now you may look at WebAuthn and you're like, well, why can't I get exactly what I want for my security modeling? And it's like, well, Passkeys, the V1 of it, which we're in right now, is how do you get to consumers and protect consumers and the large percent that don't have any second factor at all. And so now you can kind of pick those low-hanging fruit while the enterprises at like the FIDO, the EDWG with Dean, and other organizations can try to figure out what the real requirements are for those organizations with higher assurance requirements. So that's been kind of fascinating to participate in and also try to get representation for my use case while also considering all these other use cases. So
yeah. And I mean, honestly, what you guys are saying, now I have to show my nerdiness, is exactly what's in this 863, right? It says take a risk-based approach on how you protect your data, and what you guys are doing is you're talking about the use cases of the data that you have and which types of passkeys would best support those use cases. And really, that's what all organizations should be doing.
Yeah, I mean, my observation when I joined Microsoft was, in terms of FIDO, the lens that I saw most folks looking at, it's like a global configuration for everyone in your 500,000 person company around the world, right? Like every organization, I would argue, besides government, has a large subset of users where a syncable passkey is more than adequate for them. But I think we're used to applying these blanket min-bar policies across an entire organization. Some of it is because the products don't support group-based configuration, Azure AD. So those are the realities. And I think this is bringing to light, maybe it is time to actually look at, like, these users all would be perfectly fine, but this entire set of users, tenant admin is a great example. Absolutely, unconditionally, you should be using a FIDO 2 certified security key, right? So I think it's a new opportunity to look at things that way.
So I keep pounding this because I think it's really important, which is how do we get adoption on this? Because this is a super important thing to get out to the consumers, mainly because I'm tired of passwords and I'm tired of reliant parties forcing me to create a password, and I'm like out of ideas. I'm not that creative. My theory, and I'm wondering how each of you feel about this. My theory is that if we can get consumers actually to adopt passkeys first, they then will go back to their work environments, and they then will start seeing the numbers in the different IDPs move up away from passwords and into passwordless. Christiaan, I'll let you start and see how you think we can get a grander adoption.
Yes, I've got so much to say on this topic, but I mean, it's kind of like consumerization of technology, right? I think Apple is a fantastic example. The iPhone, even the MacBook, right? It was created for consumers, right? It was consumer use. Consumers used it, they loved it so much that they told their IT admins, or the CEOs, the CTOs, and the CISOs started saying, this is the phone I'm going to use at work. I'm going to dump that old BlackBerry. I want my iPhone at work. That is how this started, right? It was the consumers pushing that technology. I want to say, like, kicking and screaming into the organizations because it worked so well. It was such a well-designed product. And I'm hoping the same is true for passkeys, which again is the reason why we're starting with consumer. Yes, consumer is a large user base. We want to protect those users first. Lots of them don't have, multi-factor authentication, as we all said here. But I think it's much easier to have technology adopted by consumers, work really, really well, and then it becomes a no-brainer in the enterprise than doing things the other way around. The other thing I'll say is, and this is data that I've started to kind of like segment a little bit. How do we get over that mark, right? Where today maybe there is a waitress here in Vegas that we can talk to about passkeys, and she'll say, "Yep, I've done this before." Most people on the street, if you talk to them about passkeys, they're like, "We don't know what the hell that is," right? How do we change that? How do we get it to every single user that's familiar? I mean, if you ask them what a password is, of course they're going to know. How do we change that? And I think, the tipping point for me, it's probably, there's some social science folks that'll probably tell me I'm wrong. I'm thinking naively like 50% is kind of that tipping point, right? I want a user, if I talk to a random user on the street and I ask him like, you logged in today into how many, services, maybe 7. If you've logged in with passkeys on more than half of those, I think we're on the right track, right? I don't know how long it's going to take to get there. I have some ideas. We're starting to think about that a little bit. And arguably, that number is probably lower than 50. I think it's probably somewhere between 30 and 50%. Once you reach that tipping point, then I think we can say this thing has got legs, and probably, this is probably not going to get relegated in the heap of like failed, password replacement solutions, of which there are many. So I think for us, it's figuring out what is that number, and then it is figuring out how to reach that number, how to attain it. What's interesting is the number of accounts that we have like stored in our password managers and in other places where the browser helps you to autofill. I mean, they're, dwarfed. The majority of them are like, social services, online IT type consumer services. However, if you think about the number of places where users log into daily, it's not the same size, right? It is financial services and government, right? That is what users get, that's what, when you get down to the brass tacks, like that's what they deal with every single day. So at some point we need to, and it's a little harder, I'll say that, right? Consumer on the one side, enterprise on the other. this, call it like, regulated consumer or whatever in the middle. That's the pain that most users experience on a daily basis, and we need to figure out how to start addressing some of those use cases. Most of those we already do, but there might be some things that, we need to have a conversation about, or some additional signals or guarantees we have to give, which is exactly what we're busy with in the FIDO Alliance right now. And again, I'll, say to everyone here, if you have some of those use cases or you think you have some ideas, love to talk about those, because we do think we need to solve them to ultimately get above that 30 to 50% mark, where this stuff becomes inevitable.
Matt?
I think the one that, a couple of things I would like to see happen from the website's perspective, from the RP side, is just start building out those flows and start experimenting with what your users are comfortable with. And if everybody starts experimenting with offering passkeys as an option, yeah, there's going to be some inconsistency between all the experiences. You're going to have A, B, C, D, E, F, Z testing of all the various ways you can implement a like a passkey-based authentication flow. But at some point, well, that'll have two effects. One, it will just get people familiar with that general flow. Even if everything leading up to the WebAuthn call is slightly different and everything afterwards is slightly different, it's still going to get people used to that flow, because the one thing that still sticks in the back of my mind from some user testing that we did recently as part of building out our passwordless support is the rapidity of a passkey authentication makes people feel as though there is no way it is more secure than username, password, and some kind of second factor authentication. It's completely unintuitive to me. And so that's why I think as part of a user education thing, you just need to get people to experience it over and over and over and over until it becomes familiar. And then we can move on from that. And in the meantime, while you're familiarizing users with WebAuthn in general, eventually you're going to have some websites that do a great job of implementing a passkey-based authentication flow. And then everyone will go, oh, we're going to do it that way because that's how Google's doing it, or we're going to do it this way because that's how AWS is doing it. And then eventually all of these flows will kind of coalesce into a similar thing, and that's ultimately going to be good for familiarity, which I think is probably what a lot of people are looking for in a technology that's been on the market for 5 months. Passkeys, that is not
yeah. Consistency,
that's
right?
the word.
Have to have consistency. And I think, so to Matt's point, the learnings, right? So we, as FIDO Alliance, we have a great UX working group with many UX experts. We did a bunch of our own research, but a lot of the flows that Kevin showed yesterday were built from the learnings that the companies brought into the UX working group from what they had already experienced, right? So they weren't kind of done in a vacuum, but I think it's we're kind of all in this together kind of a thing where it's let's come together and kind of say, hey, this is what worked for us, this is what's working, we can do a little bit more research using that, and maybe we can get to a point where we're at an optimal flow, which by the way is going to change as people get to know passkeys. Right now we're saying most success in account settings, not so much at the point of sign-in. That's not going to be the case in a year, right? I think people are going to be way more familiar, and at the point of sign-in, they're going to be totally, I want to opt into that right now. And I think it's really a matter of coming together, sharing the learnings, but understanding that these things are going to change over time as people become more familiar, which is really a good problem to have.
Tim?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, the dry air kills me here.
Yeah.
Get the man
Yeah,
some
Give this man a drink.
No, the interesting thing I've seen trending on the consistency front is we're in the same stage of denial is not the right word, but with tap to pay, right? How can this be more secure on my phone, right? People are used to sticking their card in, and part of that was, there's this icon, right? So one of the things we worked to push for with the passkey icon is the tap to pay icon, right? People generally, my parents know what that means. They know they can tap a card or tap their phone and they get a certain experience, right? So consistency with the name, the icon, please use it, right? I think it's super important, right? Nobody knew what, excuse me, nobody knew what Bluetooth meant. Most people still don't know what Bluetooth means, but they know what the icon looks like and they know what it does.
Using Megan Shamas for PR, because I was responsible for that PR.
She was, yeah, so I think that's super important. I know it seems minor, but please don't be afraid of introducing the term and
well, that was my point, where I was nobody cares it's called passkey. I'm no, we need them to know that it's called passkey. Then what are we doing? And I think that, there's a little bit of being like afraid of saying, oh, we're introducing a new technology and we're better off just saying it's Face ID. And I'm like, it's really important they understand that this is different. And, it doesn't have to be a lot of words, doesn't have to be, a dissertation, but hey, this is something that, is a better replacement for passwords. And yes, they do miss the second step, whatever the step is. And to assure them that, this is better than that too. And it's a quick, it could be pretty quick, but I think it's necessary to do that.
Yeah, I will say though, consumers are a lot smarter than we give them credit for, and especially younger consumers. So one of our friends, her 11-year-old knew what multi-factor authentication was because of something that happened on Roblox. I don't understand it. It doesn't really matter. But the point is that she started explaining to me, and I told her, that's what I do. She goes, no, you don't. Right. I'm not cool enough. But with that, I think that there might be some people here who want to ask a couple of questions to these amazing speakers. Adrian has a mic. Would anyone like to ask questions? Lots of questions.
It might be helpful to come to the
Yeah, if you can come to Adrian, if you just get up and get to her, we can, There you go.
Matt, question for you. I know you mentioned, there is a place for, by the way, really fun group of banter and good chemistry there.
Try.
There is a place for technologies that will do device detection, behavior detection, and those kind of things. And we're calling this phishing resistant. How phishing resistant is it? How much account takeover protection can I get from this to not have to worry so much about those signals?
Well, passkeys are, at the end of the day, they're still WebAuthn credentials. They are still phishing resistant credentials that can only be used on a single website. So there's nothing that changes about that. So even if an attacker, in an absolute worst case scenario, an attacker somehow gets access to, no, that's a bad example. If they come up with a phishing site and they try to induce use of a passkey, the browser is going to block it because the browser knows where the user is. And the browser is going to send that bad origin to the authenticator, and the authenticator is going to go, I don't know where that is. I don't have anywhere for that. And the attacker's not going to be able to succeed at all. Nor can the attacker, through anything without account compromise, the attacker can't get the user to turn over their private key so that they can then go and impersonate the user on a legitimate site.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's the fact that there's a private key available, right?
Right.
Because OTP doesn't have, you don't have
It's
that
phishable.
certificate base. Yeah, it's phishable.
just the inherent security property, when it's created, it's bound to that domain, so you can't give it to a fake site. So that's kind of the baseline property that makes FIDO phishing resistant.
Such a strong fundamental protection, though.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's, so people don't, that part, not everybody's even aware of. When we say phishing resistant, they're like, well, how?
Yeah.
It's you can't give it away. Well, why?
Yeah.
Well, because it's.
Right, and the two things, we get a lot of questions actually about the cross-device flow, right? One of the elements of phishing resistant is proximity, right? And we are still maintaining very short proximity, similar to NFC, a little bit further, obviously, but those are the protections on top of the binding of the credential to the domain. I think the fact that WebAuthn, by default, strongly binds, it is the only option, strongly binds it to it, is unique, right? If you think about browsers and TLS errors, we used to let users bypass them. There's no bypass for WebAuthn, right? The user can't do that, right? So I think it's a very strong day one protection.
Yep. Sorry. And then there's one right here after. Go on.
My name is Raju. Is there any help for the RPs to implement the FIDO2 server on the back end? Because a weak implementation of the FIDO2 server or the passkey server will result into insecurity, because FIDO2 servers are very vulnerable for substitution attack, right? If I'm an internal user, I'll take all the public keys and put Raju's public key and then Raju for everybody, right? So if the RPs doesn't know the security vulnerabilities, you will have a very weak implementation of passkey.
Right.
It results in a bad name to the.
Well, I can't help but give you a biased answer because I've written two back-end implementations of WebAuthn, one in Python and one in TypeScript.
He just did that for fun, by the way.
It's true. And so there is fundamental verification of WebAuthn flows that, yes, a relying party in back-end code can write fairly easily. especially if you're not getting into attestation statement format verification. But there are some gotchas, and there are enough gotchas in the verification of credentials that you get back that I strongly suggest that RPs just don't try to specialize in that unless you are an organization that needs to own that completely, and go out and look at open source. There are many well-developed open source implementations of WebAuthn that are ready for you to pull in. You do have to make some database changes. Those are things libraries may or may not be able to help you with because you're storing, public key bytes. But other than that, like, these are tried and tested libraries that are used by many large organizations that have been proven. And so I would strongly suggest you go that route versus trying to roll your own, because like you said, you can get something wrong. And
I was going to say, so we have a certification program for servers. I wouldn't advise RP to leverage one that was not certified.
And I think Matt's is fully compliant.
Mine's FIDO conformant, so.
All right, one more question, and then unfortunately, we're going to get the hook.
All right, this is kind of an easy one, I hope, but it's a little bit of a gotcha as well. How do you explain to a layperson what's the difference between a passkey and login with Google or login with Microsoft? They work the same to the end users.
My perspective, I personally, and again, I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, I hope passkeys replace Consumer Federation. Like there's a very different privacy angle with Consumer Federation. That's why I don't fully agree that they're that close. When you sign in with X, that organization sees that you signed in with X, right? That is a huge privacy difference, right? And for some users, that's okay, right? Because the user experience is great using signing with Google and signing with Apple. But I do think, I can see the parallels, but I think I disagree on that fundamental fact, right? Is that the IDP can't actually see what's going on with this other party.
Well, I also think on the security side, like the fact that you're creating a very small amount of friction with the sign-in with passkey, which is verifying that that user is there and has the key that they're supposed to have, versus having an always-on single sign-on with sign-in with Google, sign-in with Apple, sign-in with Microsoft. That is the biggest difference, and as a security professional, I think that's an important difference.
But I think he was asking more like how to explain to like a consumer who wants to
why they should do it.
See, this is your gotcha.
Should they create a passkey or you sign in with Google? And like, do we care? And like, how would we explain to them the benefits of passkeys?
Yeah, I think one thing we're going to, this is not going to be a direct answer, I'm sorry. I think one thing we're going to start to see is you're going to start to see experiences provided by like browser APIs collapse, right? Into helping the user pick the best option based on like what the platform's capable of, if they have a session with Google, right? So I think you'll start to see that already with some of the stuff Christian's been working on in Android, right? If you have a Google account and a passkey and a password's probably not even going to show up in the list. Google account will probably be lower, but your passkey will be front and center. So I don't think we're ever going to solve if they're both in the list, which one does user pick? I think we're going to have to see over time which ones can we start to remove or de-emphasize.
Yeah, 10 seconds, right? So agreed, like, we're going to try and help the user because already with passwords and passkeys, there's both credentials. Which one should you pick? So I think that's already something that we're doing. Bringing federation in there is something that's happening in this new credential manager API that we're working on. So folks will start seeing that a little bit more. For RPs, for relying parties, I'll throw the Google line and say, if you are a relying party and signing with Google works for you, continue to use it. It's great. The experience is fantastic. Like the conversion that our partners are seeing is off the hook, right? However, if you can't or won't use signing with Google, and there's a enormous amount of websites out there that for reasons cannot, passkeys is the thing that you should do. So I think these two things will both continue to exist for some time. And like I said, if you can use the federation-based protocols, go for it, right? Get fantastic conversion on it. But if you can't, now you have one more option that you didn't have before.
Yep, so that was more than 10 seconds, and I think I hear music even though it's not here. So thank you so much for joining us. I had a great time. I hope you did too.